The John family case that occurred in 2009 in San Francisco, California, shocked the public and became one of the most horrifying cases in local history. A seemingly perfect family with a happy and peaceful life suddenly collapsed into tragedy. Behind this series of events came pain from the people who loved them the most. The case exposed a series of acts of domestic violence, rape, and brutal murder that no one could have expected. No one could understand the deep motive behind the acts, but clues about domestic violence and psychological pressure were gradually exposed during the investigation, causing public horror. Who is Mathew? Mathew is a young, passionate, and talented architect. He is not only hardworking but also always eager to achieve great achievements in his career. Mathew spends a lot of time on construction and design projects, always wanting to bring about impressive and sustainable works. His passion for work makes him respected by many colleagues, and his future in the architectural industry seems very open. Mathew meets Lily. One fine day, Mathew met Lily for the first time at an architectural exhibition where he was displaying a large project he had just completed. She came there at the invitation of a friend and was immediately attracted by the passion and enthusiasm that Mathew showed through his designs. For Mathew, this meeting was like a ray of light because Lily was a gentle and intelligent woman, bringing a gentleness and warmth that he had never found before. They quickly fell in love and began a deep relationship. Lily, a primary school teacher, was caring and dedicated in both her work and personal life. After a period of getting to know each other, they decided to start a family together. Mathew, despite being increasingly busy with large architectural projects, always tried to balance his career and family. First child. About 2 years after getting married, Mathew and Lily welcomed their first child, John. Happiness filled the house when they became parents. John was loved dearly and always received the best from both his parents. From clothes and toys to attention, John lacked nothing. He was the center of the family, and all eyes were always on him with love and pride. When John turned 7, Mathew and Lily had more good news. They were expecting 2 more children, this time twins. The family's happiness doubled, and both parents eagerly awaited the birth of Elisa and Elizabeth. At first, John was overjoyed by the arrival of his 2 younger sisters and did not hesitate to help his parents care for them. However, as Mathew and Lily's attention gradually shifted to their 2 daughters, John began to feel that he was no longer the center of the family. Neglect and jealousy. Mathew and Lily always gave their twin daughters, Elisa and Elizabeth, a lot of love and attention. Whether they were out for a walk or meeting friends, everyone only praised the 2 younger sisters, while John was often forgotten. No one mentioned his achievements or efforts, which made John feel abandoned and hurt. He just wanted to be loved and noticed like before. John constantly tried to get recognition from his parents. He studied hard, always achieved excellent results, helped with housework, and even took care of his 2 younger sisters with all his care. However, what John did seemed to go unnoticed by his parents. To them, those were obvious things he had to do, and they did not care about John's feelings. Worse still, when John accidentally made his 2 younger sisters cry or encountered misunderstandings, his parents did not hesitate to scold and criticize him. This made a child like him feel abandoned. The hurt inside him grew bigger and bigger. A drastic change. As time passed, the disappointment and lack of love from his parents turned John into a completely different person. He gradually gave up his efforts and gave up everything. On the other hand, instead of trying to attract his parents' attention through good deeds, John began to seek out thugs who did not care about studying or responsibility. He found sympathy in them, even though he knew that the path he chose would not bring anything good. For John, being forgotten in his family made him give up the values he used to cherish. Time passed quickly, and by 2009, John was 25 years old. At this time, he had completely sunk into vices along with the bad friends he often gathered with. The years of lacking love and care from his family made John no longer interested in fixing his life. He spent most of his time in negative activities, gradually losing himself and drifting further and further away from the path he once walked. The good values he once tried to pursue were now just a distant past. In recent years, John has lost any discipline or direction in life. On nights when he is not out causing trouble, he indulges himself in underground bars, drinking all night long. These dark and chaotic places gradually became John's familiar world, where he feels he can escape reality and the pain of being abandoned by his family. At this time, Elisa and Elizabeth are 18 years old. Thanks to their parents' love and care since childhood, both sisters are beautiful, excel at studying, and have become the pride of the family. In addition, both daughters have dreams of becoming doctors, and they have worked hard to pursue that dream. When they graduated from high school, both were accepted into the most prestigious universities, where they could embark on their journey to become talented doctors in the future. As for John, although he has fallen into depravity and is deeply involved in vices, deep down, he still wishes to hear good advice from his parents. However, every time he returned home, instead of receiving sympathy or help, he only received harsh scolding from them. His parents compared him to his two younger sisters, praised Elisa and Elizabeth for their excellence, and criticized John for not following the right path. These scoldings made John sad. Although he wanted to respond to those harsh words, he did nothing because, deep down, he still loved his parents. Every time he was criticized, John thought about the past, about the days when he was a good student, loved by his parents. He silently blamed his parents' unfair love for causing him to fall onto the wrong path he was on now. But even though he thought this way, he never said anything and just silently endured his own pain. John, after a long time hanging out with bad friends and frequenting underground bars filled with vices, gradually became blinded by a negative lifestyle. He met many people, came into contact with girls living in a world full of temptations, and his mind was gradually invaded by dark thoughts. Every time he returned home and saw Elisa and Elizabeth, the two sisters he once loved, John's eyes were now filled with lust and darkness. John not only felt hurt by the injustice of his parents but also harbored hatred. He believed that Elisa and Elizabeth had robbed him of the love and attention that should have belonged to him. These negative emotions kept smoldering in his heart, making it impossible for John to suppress his evil, hateful thoughts and dark desires toward his two sisters. The psychological trauma and injustice he felt pushed John into a worse state. On a fateful night, May 18, 2009, after drinking with his gang of friends, John returned home at around 8 p.m. His parents were away and would not return for another 2 days. When he entered the house, he was surprised to find Elisa taking a shower with the door left open. This image stimulated the dark emotions in his heart. With the alcohol in his body, John could not control himself. He rushed in, hugged Elisa tightly from behind, and performed depraved acts on his own sister. Elisa was startled but could not resist her brother's brutal force. Although she cried and begged, her cries for help were covered by the silence of the house. After John performed these depraved acts, Elisa panicked and sat down in the bathroom, unable to believe that the brother she had loved since childhood would do such things. John threatened Elisa not to reveal it to anyone. Otherwise, he would make her pay. Under her brother's threats, Elisa did not dare to say a word. That night, John continued to satisfy his lust with his other twin sister, Elizabeth. While she was sleeping in a drunken state, John entered her room, ripped off Elizabeth's clothes, and committed his depraved acts without giving her a chance to resist. After everything ended, John went into the kitchen, took out the knife that the family often used, and threatened Elizabeth. Faced with these threats, she did not dare to say a word. She curled up in a corner of the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks, and endured what her brother had just done to her. After that night, John did not stop but continued to commit his depraved acts. Over time, Elisa and Elizabeth both showed signs of abnormality. They felt tired, and their parents began to worry. After a while, noticing that the unusual changes in their two daughters were persisting, Mathew and Lily decided to take Elisa and Elizabeth to the doctor. Both parents were very worried about their children's health because recently, Elisa and Elizabeth had shown signs of fatigue and had become more distant than usual. At the examination, the doctor announced shocking news. Both girls were pregnant. Mathew and Lily were shocked and confused, not knowing what had happened. They could not believe that this could happen to their family. Back home, Mathew and Lily tried to find out the truth, but Elisa and Elizabeth were silent, not daring to reveal anything. The atmosphere in the family became tense, and the unspoken words made everyone more distant. Mathew and Lily had to face the fact that they needed to handle this situation delicately and carefully. They began to think about seeking support from psychological professionals and, at the same time, tried to open up to their children so that the two girls would feel safe enough to share the truth. One night back home, when John was absent, Elisa and Elizabeth felt they could no longer keep quiet and let things go on like this. They both mustered up the courage to talk to their parents about the fear and pain they had been holding back for so long. Elisa was the first to speak, her eyes red as she tried to express what she had been through. Mathew and Lily listened in shock and disbelief as they heard their children's story. Their emotions were a mixture of pain, anger, and regret for not noticing the signs earlier. Lily could not hold back her tears as she realized that what had happened to her daughters was unforgivable. Mathew, who always kept his cool, could not hide his pain and anger this time. Mathew and Lily understood that they could not hide and had to face John directly. Both were filled with anger, disappointment, and pain. The next evening, when John returned, the atmosphere in the house became heavy and tense. Mathew and Lily were ready for the inevitable confrontation. Mathew, despite his anger, kept the necessary calm to ask why John had done such a terrible thing. Lily stood by, unable to hold back her tears, her heart filled with pain as she witnessed her beloved child now become the source of the family's destruction. When John realized that his affair had been exposed, he had no choice but to face Mathew and Lily, knowing that he could no longer hide the truth. John began to explain, but instead of apologizing, he blamed his parents, blaming himself for what he had suffered all these years. In anger and hurt, John recounted feeling abandoned since the birth of his two sisters, Elisa and Elizabeth. He recalled the days when his parents focused all their attention and affection on his two younger sisters while he was gradually pushed aside. John bitterly talked about how he tried his best to gain recognition from his parents. He studied well, worked hard, and always tried to do his best, but all his efforts seemed to be ignored. He only received comparisons with his two younger sisters, which made him more and more dissatisfied. John continued to blame his parents for not paying attention to his feelings, ignoring what he had done, and not caring about the pain he had suffered. At this point, Mathew's anger reached its peak, and he firmly declared that he would not forgive John and would let the law punish him. Lily, despite her great pain, agreed with her husband. They knew that what John had done could not be hidden or tolerated, and that bringing John to justice was the only thing that could be done to protect their daughters and ensure that justice would be served. After hearing Mathew and Lily announce that they would put him in jail, John was terrified. In a moment of panic, he quickly begged his parents for forgiveness, tried to explain, and begged for a chance to make amends. However, all he got in return was a furious outburst from his parents. Mathew and Lily could not forgive him and remained determined to take him to court. Fear and pressure pushed John into a state of uncontrollable rage. The feeling of being cornered made him lose his mind. In anger and desperation, John rushed at his father, trying to stop what was about to happen. A fight broke out between father and son. In the chaos, John accidentally pushed Mathew hard against the wall. Mathew's head hit a nail behind him. The sudden and powerful impact caused Mathew to collapse on the spot. Lily stood there, unable to believe what had just happened. Mathew died instantly due to the severe injuries. The atmosphere in the house became quiet and terrifying as the incident suddenly escalated into an unexpected tragedy. John, in a state of extreme panic, his mind spinning with the fear of being discovered by others, decided that there was no other way out. Lily sat in front of Mathew's body and cried. John's heart pounded, cold sweat pouring out. At that moment, John rushed into the kitchen to get a knife. In his mind, at this time, he only thought about how to escape the crime. Holding the knife in his hand, the light from the kitchen lamp reflected on the sharp blade. John stood there in a daze for a few seconds, but anger and fear flared up in his heart. He quickly walked toward his mother, who was sitting in front of Mathew's body and did not pay attention to John, not knowing that he had a sharp iron knife in his hand. Without a word of warning, John approached coldly, killing his mother with the knife. He circled behind her and stabbed her repeatedly. After finishing, he watched her fall to the floor, blood pouring from her wounds. John realized that things had gone too far, but it was too late to turn back. After finishing off his mother, John stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the two bodies before him. The house was eerily quiet except for the sound of his labored breathing. John's two younger sisters were still sleeping upstairs, completely unaware of the horror that had just occurred downstairs. The slightest noise did not wake them, and John understood that time was on his side, at least for now. Fear overcame him, and John began to think of ways to cover up his actions. The thought of being caught and facing the consequences drove him to despair. He decided to create a fake scene to make everyone believe this was a robbery. John rushed into the room, rummaging through the furniture and making a mess of everything. Chairs were knocked over, wardrobes were opened, and he deliberately left a few dirty footprints on the floor. In his mind, he wondered if everything he did could cover up this terrible crime. After creating the fake scene, John stood in the middle of the chaotic room, panting. He looked around, his heart filled with fear and tension. He did not want to hesitate any longer. John decided to leave the house immediately. He walked quickly to the door, trying to keep his mind calm despite the turmoil inside. His footsteps hurried on the cold ground. John stepped out into the quiet night air, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked quickly away from the house, now only a place containing horrible memories. Leaving the scene, John hoped that everything would pass, that his plan was sophisticated enough to fool everyone. But his heart still constantly raced, the fear that the truth would soon be exposed lingering. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun had just appeared, Lisa was the first to wake up. She drowsily walked downstairs as usual, expecting to see her parents already up to prepare breakfast. But as soon as she stepped into the living room, Elisa stood still. Before her eyes was a horrifying scene. Both her father and mother lay motionless, blood-red on the floor. Panicked, her heart pounded, her lips trembled, and she could not speak for a moment. The terror surged, and Elisa screamed unconsciously. The scream tore through the silence of the house, waking Elizabeth. Hearing her sister's voice, Elizabeth rushed downstairs quickly. When she arrived, she was also stunned by the unbelievable scene. The two sisters cried out in despair, calling their parents' names, but both of them were dead. In a panic, Elisa quickly took out her phone and called the police with trembling hands. After receiving the report, the police immediately arrived at the scene. Police cars rushed over with flashing lights, breaking the quiet atmosphere of the morning. The two sisters, Elisa and Elizabeth, were still sitting on the ground, their faces covered in tears, extremely panicked. The officers quickly approached, trying to calm the two girls, gently comforting them. In their shock, another officer quickly called for backup and an ambulance. The police immediately sealed off the entire scene. Yellow tape was pulled out, surrounding the house to prevent strangers from approaching. Investigators began to check every corner of the house, recording every detail, from footprints and overturned furniture to traces of blood on the floor. The atmosphere became heavy, with only the clicking of cameras and the conversations between investigators. Meanwhile, Elisa and Elizabeth were taken outside to separate them from the scene. Still in shock from what they had just witnessed, they sat in the police car, trying to understand the horror that had just happened, filled with anxiety and pain. During the investigation, the police determined that this could be a robbery based on the mess in the house and the presence of two bodies. However, after a thorough inspection, they realized that no property was missing. Money and jewelry were still intact. This left the investigators in a state of confusion. A robbery, but nothing was taken? This did not make sense and raised many questions about the real motive of the case. Just then, John, the elder son, arrived home. He walked through the blockade tape with a shocked face, pretending not to know what had happened. Seeing the horrific scene before his eyes, John burst into tears and rushed to his parents' bodies. The police officers, seeing John's painful reaction, initially felt sympathy. They tried to comfort him while continuing to investigate the remaining clues. When committing the crime, John was careful not to leave any clues that could make the police suspect him. However, the police did not easily ignore any small details. They proceeded to check the security cameras around Mathew and Lily's house to look for clues. After hours of examination, they discovered a suspicious image on a camera near the house. There was a man walking by around the time of the incident. This man walked normally when he got closer to the house, but what caught the police's attention was that, when the camera recorded the image of him returning, this person was holding something in his hand and moving faster, seemingly running in panic. Although the video was not clear and the images were recorded in poor lighting conditions, the man's unusual attitude and actions aroused strong suspicion from the police. Based on the camera footage, investigators began to focus on identifying the man. Although there was not enough clear evidence to conclude, they believed that this man was highly likely to be the killer. Tensions were high, and the investigation team was determined to follow the faint trail they had just discovered. After several days of investigation, everything seemed to have reached a dead end. Although the police had collected some clues, including a blurry video of the suspicious man, there was no specific information to go further. They were unable to identify the man in the video, and there were no obvious traces at the scene indicating the presence of a stranger. Meanwhile, the family and friends of Mathew and Lily held a funeral in a mournful atmosphere, drawing public attention to the case. The pressure from the public and the media was growing, demanding that the police find the truth quickly. John, still playing the role of the grieving son, attended the funeral with his two sisters, expressing his grief over the loss of his family. No one suspected him because everything he did was so convincing. The longer the investigation lasted, the more confident John became that he would escape the law. But deep down, he was still afraid that everything could change at any moment if a clue suddenly appeared. After many days of investigation without finding any clear clues, the police decided to summon Mathew's family to collect more information. John, Elisa, and Elizabeth were invited to the police station, hoping to discover something unusual in the family's life before the tragedy. In the quiet interrogation room, the bright lights created a tense atmosphere. The police began to question John first. They focused on recent events, asking if anything strange had happened in the family or if there was anyone his parents had offended. John, with a sorrowful expression, answered each question in an emotional tone. He insisted that everything was normal, that his family had no conflicts with anyone, and that his parents were very kind people who had never made enemies. In the quiet interrogation room, the bright lights created a tense atmosphere. The police began to question John first. They focused on recent events, asking if anything strange had happened in the family or if there was anyone his parents had offended. John, with a sorrowful expression, answered each question in an emotional tone. He insisted that everything was normal, that his family had no conflicts with anyone, and that his parents were very kind people who had never made enemies. John tried to portray the image of a son suffering from loss, hiding the tension rising inside. But when the police asked the two sisters, what Elisa and Elizabeth told about John left the officers stunned and shocked. At first, both sisters remained silent out of fear and did not dare to say what John had done to them. Only after the police assured them that they would be protected did Elisa and Elizabeth begin to open up, recounting what they had previously tried to keep hidden. Elisa, struggling to hold back tears, said John often abused them when there were no adults at home. John threatened and sometimes even physically and mentally attacked them. They were always afraid to speak out for fear that John would become more aggressive. Before the night of the incident, they told their parents that John was the one who had gotten them pregnant. After that, everything became unclear. Their statements and tears caused the police to change the investigation, focusing on John. When questioned, John said he went out drinking with friends, but they confirmed that John came home early, which made the police suspect that he was involved in the death of his parents. Based on the conflicting statements and suspicious signs, the police determined that John was the main suspect in the case. They decided to interrogate him more seriously and thoroughly. Initially, John remained calm, trying to maintain his story. However, under the pressure of the investigators and the constant questioning, combined with the undeniable evidence and testimony of Elisa and Elizabeth about what he had done to them, John lost his confidence. Unable to find an excuse, John finally broke down and confessed to killing his parents. He said that when his parents discovered his secret with his two sisters and threatened to call the police, he panicked. During the argument, John accidentally pushed his father against the wall, hitting a nail, causing him to die instantly. Panicking after his father's death, John lost control and attacked his mother to cover up the evidence, leading to her death. John then staged the crime scene as a robbery to cover up his crime. After collecting enough evidence and John's confession, the police officially arrested him for murder. The family was devastated when Elisa and Elizabeth were forced to face the truth that their brother was the murderer. The revelation shocked and outraged the public. People could not believe that a son could be so cruel to his own parents. The case quickly became the focus of the news and received great attention from the public. John's trial took place in a tense atmosphere, attracting great attention from the public. John, sitting in the dock, quietly faced serious charges of murder. The prosecutor presented the case in detail, from the motive to the process by which John murdered his parents. Clear evidence was presented, including the testimony of the two sisters, traces at the scene, and John's own confession. During the trial, all the details of the case were revealed. The cruelty of John's actions and the heartbreaking consequences he caused shocked the jury and the audience. From the moment his parents discovered John's secret until he lost control, the case became a symbol of the family's complete collapse. Finally, the court convicted John of murder and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. This verdict was made in the face of public consensus, who were outraged by John's brutal behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, John bowed his head in silence, accepting his fate. The trial ended, but the wound the case left in the hearts of his family and public opinion is still deep and difficult to heal.